So at the moment we've got this basic website on the left here, and you can see the layout isn't perfect, the typography is not very good, and there's a lot we can improve. So on the right here is what we're working towards: a lot more space, cleaner, more modern fonts, and a consistent layout and design throughout. So same size image, same size video, and we've got the same colors here as we do up the top. So that's what we're working towards in this video. We're going to be working almost exclusively within the CSS section of our website, but we might make small changes to the HTML, like adding section tags. We're going to start by looking at positioning the H1 and nav elements, so creating padding and margin around those. We're going to resize the video so it matches the image, adjust the line height for a cleaner and easier to read paragraphs, and we're going to style the footer so it matches the rest of the layout. Okay, so if we go back to our documents here, we've got our HTML section, and we're not going to make too many changes to that, but we're going to start by creating some padding around these headings. So this mountain life heading up here, that's our H1 heading, and you can see if I add padding 100 pixels, it creates all the way around the content, top, right, bottom and left. It creates 100 pixels padding. If I put in now margin 100 pixels, you can see the difference. Now instead of between the content and the edge of the color there, it's actually creating a margin of blank space around the edge of that element. So that's the difference between padding and margin. What I want to have actually here is a padding of 40 pixels at the top and 150 pixels from the left. So to do that, I can actually combine them into one rule. If you have four numbers here, you can define the top padding, so I could say 40 pixels. The right padding I could have as 0 pixels. The bottom padding I'd probably want to have the same as the top, but just to illustrate a point I could give you 100 pixels, and then for the left I'm going to stay with 150 pixels. So when you have padding or margin, the same idea, you can define either just one number, which is all four of them the same. If you have four numbers like this, it goes top, right, bottom, left, or in this case I'm just going to define two numbers. So we've got 40, that represents the top and bottom margin, and 100, which is the left and the right. I'm actually going to change that to 150 pixels. And I'm going to get rid of this margin in this case. Also, you can see we still have this margin down the left. That's because of this body tag that's given us a 20 pixel margin down the left, so we can see these bullet points. I'm going to delete out that whole rule because we're not going to use that going forward. So now you can see up the top here, our header section goes right to the edge of the page. So now I want to make this navigation match up with that, and we have a 150 pixel left margin and we have 40 pixels top and bottom. So I can go to my nav section here and put in exactly the same rule. I can even just copy and paste that into that section there. Now you can see our alignment is perfect. Now I'm going to adjust the section down here, the padding and the margin we want to have to match up to this. If we just try and put in a rule on the body, it will move everything across like we saw before. So we're actually going to add a new HTML tag, and that's the section tag. We're going to put the opening section tag before the paragraph here, and have the closing paragraph tag before the footer. So everything in that section we can manipulate with CSS and adjust the margin on the left, for example. So back in my index.html, I'll just zoom in on the text a little bit here. And directly below the header tag, the header closing tag, we're going to add in a section tag. Just delete out that closing tag. Scroll all the way down to the bottom just above the footer, and I'm going to close that section tag. Now to keep my HTML nice and tidy, I'm going to select everything that's within that section, press tab to indent, so now it's clear that everything in there is part of that section, it's nested within that section. So now if I go back to my styles and add in a new rule for section, I'm going to put a margin left of 150 pixels. So now that matches up perfectly with what we had there before. Now there's a lot more we need to do to fix up the margins and padding around our paragraphs, our bullet points, and the spacing between these different elements. But before we go too far, I actually want to change the font, because this is just the default font. It's a serif font, and it's not particularly appropriate for a modern website. So to change the font, we've got some really good resources we can use, and we're going to go to fonts.google.com. So on this website there's a whole list of different examples, different types of fonts. You can filter them by serif, sans serif, and so on. Serif means it has the little curly bits on the end, so if we restrict that just to serif fonts, things like Times New Roman are common serif fonts. They have little accents on the edge of all of the characters. If we go to sans serif, that means without serif, you can see they're a lot more square, and a lot more modern. Lots of these fonts you'll see all over the place, like Roboto, Lato is quite a common one. So you can have a look through this and choose a font that suits what you're after. If you're interested in looking at a bit more detail, so I'll look at Lato for example, if I just click on the heading there, it shows me all of the different characters in the set, lots of different styles, so this is available in much thinner styles and bolder styles as well. That's quite useful for us. And it shows you common combinations with different fonts. So I'd recommend for your websites that you use one or maybe two different fonts. The second font you could use for headings and the other font for the main paragraphs. But one font would be perfectly suitable as well. If you're happy with this selection, you can click select this font, and then it brings up this option down the bottom. If you're back in the home page, you can just click on the pluses that they have by all of these as well. Then click on the black bar, and it brings you up a few more different options. And I'm going to click Customize, because as I said, this font has lots of different weights that we can import. Notice also it references a load time. We need to be aware of how many different fonts and different types of those fonts we import, because they need to be downloaded to the client's computer the first time that they load the web page. After that they will be cached and stored locally, but we want to minimize the cost on their download as much as possible. So I'm only going to choose the ones that I really need. I'm going to go for light 300 and regular 400. That'll do for now. So I can go back to embed, and you see it actually gives us the code that we're going to need to put into our HTML, this code here. It's another link tag, just like we've used in the past. So if I copy that and go back to brackets, back to my HTML, and remember these kinds of things which we don't actually display on the website but we want to use to control what happens within our website, we put in the head section. So just like the link to our CSS page, I'm going to paste that in there, and we have a link this time to an external web page, which is the Google Fonts page, and that will incorporate these fonts that we specified here. It's still not going to be available or used in our website because we have to put it into our CSS. So back on Google Fonts, we can just select this section down here, font family. That's how you define the fonts you want to use. And I'm going to copy that, go back to brackets, into styles, and I'm going to put it into this asterisk section up the top so it applies to all of the different sections. So notice Lato is the name of the font that we chose. It's also put in this second font, sans serif. That's a default font in case for some reason or another this font can't be loaded. It's going to default back to sans serif, which each browser has its own sans serif default font. So now if we have a look at our website, you can see that all of the fonts have been updated, and straight away it's looking a lot more modern than it did with that old serif font that we had before. Feel free to play around with Google Fonts and import lots of different types of fonts. You can import lots of different ones at the same time if you like, but again be wary of the load that's going to put on your download speed. When we have a look over here, I want to make this font a little bit bigger. So in my H1 tag, I can add a new rule, font size, and I'm going to go to 96 pixels in this case. So that looks really, really large. But one little trick to make these headings look a little nicer is we can decrease the font weight. So if we make a really large heading like this, we can make all of the characters thinner by changing the font weight, in this case to 300. And remember, that's one of the options we chose back in Google Fonts. We had the 300 font weight of the Lato font. So now it's a more modern, clean, simple, thin title that we have up the top. I've also decided that I want to have all of the text in this title as capitals, and the same for these links down here. But rather than going back and changing it in my HTML, I'm actually going to change it using the CSS. And because all of this content here is part of the header tag, all I need to do is put in a new rule for my header, and we can use the text transform and change that to uppercase to make that happen. So you can see this is now all uppercase despite what is in our HTML over here. Okay, now I want to have a look at the size of the rest of the fonts. We've increased this size here, but I want to make these a little bit bigger and the rest of the text as well. So if I go back to my style, and again in my asterisks up here I'm going to create a default font size, and we're going to increase it a little bit to 24 pixels. So you can see straight away everything's a little bit bigger. I also want to space out these lines here. When they're really tight together like that, it makes it a little bit hard to read. So again, to create some more space on our website, we're going to change the line height, and that of course is part of the paragraph tag, because all of this text here is in the P tags. So if I just make another new rule, P, and we're going to change line height, and let's call it 150%. So that's 150% of normal, so you've got an extra half a space in between there. If I scroll down, you can see it hasn't affected these headings, it hasn't affected these lists, but only everything within the P tag. I also want to have a bit of space above and below that, so I'm going to put a margin, and I want this to be on the top and the bottom. So remember, there are 3 different ways we can specify our margin, either with 4 numbers, which go top, right, bottom, left, 2 numbers, which just refer to the top and the bottom, or with 1 number, which refers to everything all around. So in this case, we're going to need to have 2 numbers, because we want to have one for the top and the bottom, and another one for the sides. So top and bottom I want to have 40 pixels, and for the sides I want to have 0 pixels. So that means it lines up on the left edge here. We've got 40 pixels margin at the top, so between that blue line that you can see there and the bottom of our nav, and between that blue line there and the top of our list that we have 40 pixels around our paragraphs. That matches the same amount of padding that we have around our H1 element, which is our heading up there, and also the spacing we have around our nav element, so we're keeping everything nice and consistent. So I'm going to stop this video here. It's getting rather long, so I just want to recap what we've gone over so far. We've looked at importing fonts from Google. We've used the font family property or rule, so that changes the fonts within our website, font size, line height, which changes the spacing between lines, text transform that we can use to change everything from lowercase to uppercase, vice versa, and margin and padding, which of course are part of our box model that we'll study in depth. So make sure you get your website up to the same point, and we'll continue formatting in the next video.